Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm calling this meeting of the Oakville Public Library Board to order for Thursday, May 18th, 2023. Before we get started, I would like to read our land acknowledgement that the Oakville Public Library is situated on the Treaty Number 14 and Treaty Number 22 treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. Oakville is currently home to many different First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Regardless of where we come from, we are all interconnected through the land we live on, the water that we use, and the air that we breathe. We are committed to a continuous learning journey and allyship. We seek to elevate Indigenous voices and lived experience to cultivate reconciliation in Oakville. And I just have to do one thing here. Sorry, my technology is a little slower than, because this is not my computer. Okay, members of the board, before we actually get into the business of the meeting, I know I mentioned this at our recent consultation that we had, but I want to take a moment to acknowledge publicly and express our condolences with respect to the passing of our loyal employee, Jennifer Stephen, that occurred on the 28th. So I have a brief statement I just want to read into the record, and you bear with me. I think this is important that we recognize the passing of this wonderful employee. So at this time, I'd like to take a moment to remember Jennifer Stephen, Oakville Public Library's Director of Customer Experience, who died tragically on April 28th. Although Jennifer was at the Oakville Public Library for only a short time, she left a lasting impression on our organization, and staff will fondly remember her compassionate leadership and bright smile. Oakville Public Library will be creating a pollinator garden located at Woodside Branch to honor Jennifer's love of gardening and to recognize the seeds she planted during her time with us. Jennifer will be sorely missed by all those lives she touched. Please join us for a moment of silence for Jennifer Stephen. Thank you for that. I hope that Terry, you'll carry our condolences on behalf of the board to her family and friends. Let them know that we were thinking of her. We didn't get to know Jennifer very well in the short time that she was with us. I had an opportunity to have a few conversations with her. She truly was a wonderful individual, and I wish we could have gotten to know her better. But her legacy will live on at the Public Library, that's for certain. Members of the board, I should say, committee secretary, do we have any regrets this evening?
We have regrets from Bill Smith.
Oh, that's great. He's still out of the country. Any declarations of pecuniary interest to declare this evening? Not seeing any, we'll move on. The minutes of the previous regular meeting as well as a confidential meeting were circulated from April 20th, 2023. What is your wish with respect to those? Can I get a motion to approve? Thank you. Seconded by, thank you. All in favor? Those are carried. And that was for both the regular as well as the confidential minutes. We have 3 items on our consent agenda. That doesn't mean that you can't ask questions or raise them from the agenda. Is there anybody wishing to talk about or ask questions with respect to the Oakville Public Library key agenda items, which is 5.1, Health and Safety Report 5.2, or the Employee Retention and Turnover Metrics 5.3? Ray?
I move all 3.
Thank you. They've been moved. Last call for lifting them. Kelso?
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Sorry. Hello?
Hello? Just a quick question. So we talked about, we talked about retention, and that's what this is all about. So it's an excellent job in terms of keeping turnover low. In fact, it would suggest that turnover is too low, and maybe there's some blockers there that you may want to consider, but that's just me looking at numbers and not necessarily knowing the people. But in terms of the, if you look at this as a tub, there's a tap and a drain, right? And turnover is a drain. How about the tap? And maybe that's a topic for a conversation some other time. Very interested to learning more about how we attract into the library. If we go out to colleges and recruit recent graduates, and I think it's an interesting topic, not necessarily contained in this report, but it's something that perhaps could be addressed at some other point.
Sure. Would it work best if maybe the next time we bring this, we put in a section that just kind of highlights our overall retention
Wonderful.
procedure and how we go about that for different positions?
Yeah, well, not so much, I'm not concerned about retention. I think you guys are doing a fantastic job.
Recruitment, that's what I meant,
It's
sorry.
recruitment,
Yeah.
yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we can do that.
Go ahead. Microphone?
The bit about the short-term temporary contracts, that includes internal short-term promotions, which is great. So people are moving on up and getting a shot at a secondment or a...
Correct.
But does that also mean at the sort of maybe the entry level of the organization, are you able to also post short-term contracts for people to come in because so-and-so has been put in a promotion, therefore their position is available, maybe at the lower level of the employee scale?
Yeah, no, absolutely. A lot of what happens, if we have one of our higher levels either move into a permanent promotion or we take a contract, there is that backfill and everybody kind of gets bumped. And some of the challenges is that as everybody moves into new roles, the contracts get shorter and shorter and shorter because of that part of that process. But we have been really pleased when that happens that almost everything is staying internal. There's a lot of movement and gives people the opportunity to try out new roles. We also do have a number of contract positions that we're trying out, I think is the best way to kind of frame it, because we are seeing traffic patterns that are different than pre-COVID, and some branches are struggling more than others, so bringing in positions to kind of see where we can provide support and then considering whether or not to bring those forward as part of the budget for 2024 to make them permanent. So we are looking at areas like that too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further on the consent items? Excuse me. Celso, since you lifted that item off the agenda, do you mind being the seconder? Absolutely. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we approve items 5.1 through 5.3. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. We have no confidential consent items, so I direct your attention to our discussion items starting with 7.1, which is the 2022 Oakville Public Library financial statements.
So I'm going to hand this over to Jade, Manager of Finance, to go over the financial statements and then the auditors for the audit. So Jade.
Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to join you tonight. And so I'll be speaking quickly to item 7.1 on the agenda and 7.2. And so this is the 2022 financial statements where I'll highlight a couple items for the board. And then after this, I'll introduce the library's external auditors, KPMG, and they'll present their audit findings report. And then hopefully we can circle back. And once you've heard the audit findings report, approve the 2022 financial statements. So in terms of 7.1 on the agenda, the recommendation before you is to approve the financial statements, and the staff report contains much of the relevant information, but there are a few items that I wanted to touch on. And so the first is that KPMG is prepared to issue the library an unqualified or clean audit opinion, and shortly they'll walk us through how they came up with this and the various aspects of their audit. I also wanted to remind everybody that these financial statements are prepared in accordance with public sector accounting standards. And so this is very different than the presentation that you see quarterly on the variance reports. And so note 6 to the financial statements reconciles the differences between the two, and they mainly relate to capital assets. And so for the operating budget, these capital purchases we consider as an in-year expense since it's cash out the door. But for accounting standards, the collection is set up as an asset and then recognized as an expense through amortization over the useful life of the asset. So it does create a bit of a difference there. In terms of the reconciliation between the two methods of presentation, so the budget standards as well as then the public sector accounting standards, the statement of operations shows the operating surplus that was repaid to the town in 2022, and it was approximately $429,000. And so this differed slightly from the detailed variance report on Q4 that you received in February, and the difference related simply to one invoice that came in late. but the services were performed in 2022, and so it was accrued back into the year before the audit started. And since the February report spoke in detail about the various line items, I won't go into this again, but I did want to touch on the overall financial statements surplus. So this is the surplus in accordance with public sector accounting standards. So in 2022, this surplus was approximately 28,000 compared to in 2021, a deficit of approximately 1.3 million. And so as a reminder to everyone, in 2021, we started to return the operating surplus back to the town in years so that we wouldn't have significant fluctuations year over year on the financial statements. And it was also to align with best practices. And with this change, though, the 2021 comparative column includes both the 2020 financial statement surplus repayment as well as the 2021. And so that's why you see a significant difference year over year between the two on the surplus. And so those are the main items that I wanted to discuss briefly. But before I turn it over to KPMG, I wanted to pause quickly to see if anyone had any questions on the financial statements, or I could answer any of them after KPMG presents.
Actually, we are going to, we need to deal with this report first, and then we deal with KPMG. So they're two separate items. So questions for Avis? Not questions for Avis, questions, comma, Avis?
Sorry, this is quite a granular question. I'm just trying to understand how the amount for the operating surplus repayment of $428,972, how that relates to the revenue less expenses, because I see a different number when I take the 11.7 million minus 11.2. And so I was just trying to understand how that operating surplus repayment gets set.
Yeah, correct. Note 6 to the financial statements includes this. So the reconciliation between the two. So if you were to take the revenues and minus the expenses, we still also need to back out any change in employee future benefits, the change in amortization on the capital assets, as well as the change in the development reserve fund and any changes on the surplus for OCF. So we really do treat the library as a separate entity from those two funds. And then it's just the things that we treat different for financial statement purposes versus the budget purposes. So if you look on the statements, it shows the 429. And so if we could have included on note 6 to the statements, we could have added that back in and then subtracted out to show that we had repaid it. And that really gets us to where the end number.
Understood. Thank you.
Thanks, Avis. Further questions on the financial statements, Celso?
Hi, my question is going to use numbers from two different reports. So let me state the numbers I'm looking at first, and then I'll ask a question. So, and this is all about expenses. So in 2021, the total expenses is approximately 10.4 million. 2022, 11.2. 2023, which comes from a different report, the projected year-end totals is 12.2. So if this is correct, there is an increase from 2021 to 2022 to about 0.8 million, 7.7%, give or take. And then there's an increase, if we use the projected number, of 1 million year over year. And even though it's below budget, it's a significant, it's almost 9%. So I was just wondering if you could comment on the reasons for that significant increase. I see professional services and benefits is half of it, but it's not all of it, because there's some items that are sort of going down, some others are going up. So I was just wondering if you could comment on what's behind this significant increase.
Yeah, so maybe first, if I could speak to the difference between 2021 and 2022, and then I'll let Tara or Belinda speak to the 2023 projections, as I'm not familiar with those numbers as much. So in terms of 2021 versus 2022, there were a few realignments this year as well. So some of our increases within purchase services, it breaks it down of what the details were, but We have realigned some additional costs that relate specifically to the library that had in the past been held corporately with the town. And so what I mean, or what I'm referring to is there's two main software components that the library uses. And so the budget as well as the expenditures used to be held within the town along with other corporate IT costs, but those have all moved over to the library in 2022. And so that difference was approximately, I believe, around 250,000. And then there are also differences related to supplies, and we had differences in janitorial services. And as a reminder, in 2021, it was a bit of a unique year as we didn't have full services through the recovery of COVID. We did still have some time where we were doing rolling branch closures, and so certain services weren't at full capacity. And then 2022, we had a bit more of a full year. So some of those increases were shown just back to as a post-COVID recovery time. And does that help answer the questions between 2021 and 2022?
Certainly, thank you.
And if I could ask Belinda or Tara to speak to the 2023 projections.
Yeah, so the budget for 2023 was approved in January this year. So our process is actually starting in July, the board gets a budget driver report, kind of highlights key issues that we kind of see that will drive the 2024 budget. And then normally in October, we bring the board kind of a projected budget and then for discussion, and then it gets approved and then taken to council. So for 2023, our approved budget by both the board and council included things like inflation for our collections. It included 3 new staff members for IT, for our IT department. It included, overall salary increases. But I think that the key driver, if I remember correctly, for the 2023 directly related to the 3 new staff members for our IT department were the main drivers for that.
No, thank you. It just feels, if it's about 3 people, essentially it's $1 million over last year. If we take the projection, right?
Yep.
I suspect there's more to it than that in those numbers, but that's something we can talk about in a future review, perhaps?
No, absolutely. I'd have to go back to the budget report to really detail, which I can send to you, that really provides the whole overview of exactly what made up that percentage increase.
Okay, awesome. That'd be great. Yeah, and along with that, do you feel that costs go up hand in hand with circulation? As circulation goes up, costs are expected to go up at the same level, or they're not necessarily? Is there economies of scale and synergies there? There is
a correlation to a certain degree, particularly related to collections. The more books circulate, the more we need to buy. They get worn out faster, particularly, children's books. We get those early reader books. They're not hardcover. They have a very short life. We're lucky that they're not very expensive, but they are we go through them significantly. Quickly, same with our hardcover. So the more circulation that we have, the more need there is to maintain the collection and purchase that. So there is an issue there. It also relates to staffing as well, because the more we circulate, the more we need to return. And that's something I mentioned when you were asking about recruitment and retention, that we've been trying out by taking some of the surplus or vacant positions and kind of moving into new areas, because we are seeing that Glen Abbey, for example, is taking 40% of all returns right now for the entire system, which means that they've been over capacity. They haven't been able to handle the amount of returns coming into there. So we have had to look at how we can provide more support for them, but also look at other branches to see where they may not need as much support and how we can kind of like reallocate items for that. But the challenge is that that's not just one job, right? So it's kind of hard to remove one task and move it over. So for areas like that, we're also having to look at, okay, are we going to need in additional staff to support that? Circulation programming, we're seeing programming is definitely picking up again as well. Higher demand for programming, so that has additional costs to that. But again, it's people coming through the door, so that's always exciting. It's always a good problem to have.
Yeah, and along the same lines, we saw in some of these other numbers here that the digital circulation is going through the roof
Yeah.
versus the physical one is sort of trending down.
Correct.
So do you see that as far as personnel costs, if we project it out in a few years, if this trend continues, could personnel costs come down?
I'm not sure they're going to come down. I think the work may shift because I think what we're expected to provide the community will continue to change. So as I mentioned, we're definitely seeing a growth in programming. We're having broader conversations with organizations about providing support in different ways. And that'll be some of the questions that the board will have to consider is, our food banks are growing. Our non-traditional collections, our sport kits, our life jackets, our laptops, our Tinker toys, those things are growing. And so they actually require a little bit more work than a traditional book. So like I said, as our services shift, that's something we'll have to keep an eye on. Is it services shifting or actually, are we saving or are we actually just growing?
Yeah, it sounds like it allows you to shift
Correct.
the programs towards more added value
Yes.
type of work with the same amount of personnel.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Celso. Further questions? And I'll take questions, by the way. We're going to deal with items 7.1 and 7.2 at the same time, so we'll just go through all of those and then we'll vote on both of them together. Meredith.
Just a question of clarification about some of the expenses under the purchase services, so the last page on the schedule of expenses. And so I just noticed the repairs and maintenance, I was surprised that was a decrease over last year by about 25%. And just knowing the state of repair of Central, I was curious why there was less budgeted for repairs and maintenance.
And Belinda can potentially jump in here and help, but that's the total for overall. So we have been making improvements at various branches, which should then allow them to stabilize over time. Central has definitely been the exception to that as we continue to have ongoing issues. And I think if we were to break it down, you'd see that Central would be an increase, whereas some of the other branches would be lower. Utilities is also, we are seeing that we've been budgeting higher for utilities, and we've been trying to right-size that. It's actually a significant challenge, not just for us, but for the entire town, in order to try and figure out utilities. We're seeing decreases, but we have concerns about, are those long-term decreases? Do we want to change some of those budgets? So there's those pieces, but if I can give you a much better breakdown at a later date, unless Belinda knows offhand.
I can jump in. What years are you comparing? Can you clarify the repairs and maintenance?
Yeah, the budget is 336,400, and last year was 434,623.
I'm gonna have to look at that more clearly. I'm not sure exactly what that is. So you're comparing to 2023 current budget to 2022 actuals?
That's right.
Okay, I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, we'll get back to you.
We'll get back to you.
Yep.
Thank you, Meredith. Further questions, Andrew?
Just to clarify, I believe that that's the 2022 budget, not the 23 budget. It's listed. Is that not right?
This is the 2022 financial statements,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so the budget column is the 22
22,
budget.
yeah, 'cause we're
and
still
then
in
the 22
23.
actuals, yes?
Okay.
Is that true?
It's the year ending 2022,
Yes,
December 31st, 2022, and also 2021, and the budget would be 2022's budget, correct?
correct.
Yes.
Does that clarify things you meant?
Okay, great. Ray?
Yeah, just for clarity, where you're saying, it says at the top, the budget, that's what you're saying is your actualized budget for 2022. That's what we're, so it's not 2023,
No.
it's just 2022
Yeah.
actualized. Okay, thank you.
Further questions? I have one which really isn't budget, but you mentioned something, an interesting statistic, and I just want to clarify. You say Glen Abbey's taking 40% of our returns?
Last time we looked, yes.
Do we know why that is?
Not yet.
Are we going to do a dive on that?
Yeah, we're definitely digging into that. we had started, it got disrupted, so we will look to pick that back up.
Yeah, because I imagine, I wonder if one of the issues might be convenience of drop-off or something? Like,
And that's what we're trying to sort out is where they're being, are they all being, because Glen Abbey circulation doesn't account for that, them getting that many returns. But the challenge, and it's a blessing and a curse for Glen Abbey, is that people could borrow it from another place, but it's such a central hub that it makes sense that everything just gets kind of gathered and dumped. But it wasn't like this pre-COVID. So, and that was still the case pre-COVID. So we are trying to figure out if there's another driver besides just convenience.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Could be awareness too of where the branch is located. It's a
Very
very
much.
popular branch.
Yeah.
Ray, did you have your hand?
Yeah, just a question. Would there be consideration of any parallel programming going on at QE or at Glen Abbey, the aquatics programs and everything else, where they, for convenience, one-stop shopping and the kids are swimming and they're dropping off their books? Because with all the changes that have been happening in the rec centers,
Yeah.
that might be one of the drivers.
And that's, I think, we might have to look at whether or not Recreation's done any significant program changes or even like scheduling, and have they started offering 20% more programming? Like, these are questions that we're going to have to answer in partnership with Rec to see if that might be a driver.
Certainly worthwhile to find out so you can properly allocate resources. Andrew?
Well, it occurs to me that the renovation on Glen Abbey was done not long before COVID. Does your foot traffic determine the average amount of time people are spending in the branch?
We can't track how long people are in the branch with our current technology. We can just tell how many people are coming through the door, but they can't track who. Although we are in conversations about potentially using new technology to be able to track where people are in the branch and how long they're sitting there. That's something that we're looking at doing at a later date.
Based on the pace of the footfalls, could you do a rough estimate of, you know, the average duration people are spending, perhaps?
There's just no way to do that, because all it tells us is this many people came in and this many people came out, right? So
It's not timestamped.
It is timestamped, so we can track that, you know, and we've done this when we reallocated our hours last year coming out of COVID. We did some shifting and we used the footfall traffic and the hours for that. So we did cut back, like pre-COVID, some of our branches closed at 8:30, and we actually closed some of them at 8 to be able to open, like Glen Abbey and Iroquois Ridge are open a bit later and kind of expand their hours, because traffic at 7:30 to 8 just bombed. So we're like, why don't we just reallocate those and move it over here? But what it doesn't tell us is if somebody's been there from 1 o'clock and is leaving at 8 o'clock when we close.
Yeah, anecdotally, I mean, it's always been busy, but it seems that there's more people there lately when I've called in.
That is definitely, you're not wrong. That is the feeling of the branch as well.
Okay, thanks.
Great branch,
Yeah.
obviously, yeah. Further questions or comments? Okay, I guess, Jade, are we looking for the presentation from our auditors now?
Correct.
Okay. Would you like to introduce our auditors for us, and we'll get right into that?
Yeah, for sure. And so joining us today are Matt Ciradelli, who's the audit senior manager on the engagement, and Carlos Alvarez, the audit partner.
Welcome, gentlemen.
You guys, I'll turn it over to you.
have
Thank
the
you,
floor.
and good evening to all of you. Happy to present the audit findings for the 2022 fiscal year. For those who are following within their package, I believe this findings report begins on page 41. From an overall audit highlight perspective, certainly there were no surprises in terms of how we executed the audit. I would say that all of the procedures went according to our original plan. There were no surprises in the audit. And if you skip a couple more pages, if you would like to show it on screen, on page number 4, from a risk perspective, there were no additional risks that were identified in the current year. What would be an audit without discussing misstatements? Happy to report to all of you that it was a clean sheet. And what that means is there were no uncorrected audit misstatements, nor are there any corrected misstatements. The reason why we would comment on corrected misstatements is because that provides what I would call a better indication of the quality and the completeness of the package that was provided to us at the onset of the audit. Now, as a reminder, we as external auditors do not audit every single transaction. We do have this concept of materiality that we use to plan and perform the audit. And in terms of providing you a better indication of our level of scope, any audit differences that would have exceeded $16,000 would be required for us to communicate with you as the audit committee. So again, there were no adjustments, corrected or uncorrected. From a deficiency standpoint, we are required to document your major processes. There were no control deficiencies of any sort. From a financial statement perspective, if you were to line these financial statements up with the prior year, there were no changes in any of the underlying accounting policies. So the way the debits and the credits came together would have been on an identical basis as the prior year. Now, we are substantially complete. On the next page, it highlights some customary items that are always outstanding at this point in time. Certainly entertaining all of your questions here this evening. We will ask management to sign a very important letter. It is called a management representation letter. That letter does a great job in terms of outlining what are management's responsibilities as it pertains to these financial statements versus the responsibilities of the external auditor. And certainly we will do a trade between the signed management representation letter and the signed independent auditor's report. Moving along to the next slide. On every single audit within Canada, our auditing standards require us to respond to two specific risks. And the first is the risk associated with fraudulent revenue recognition. And the second risk, which is outlined on page number 7, is the fraud risk associated with management override of controls. I can confirm to all of you that based on all of the procedures that we performed, all of the testing that we reviewed, all of the documents that we reviewed, there was nothing that was considered by any means to be suspicious. All of the transactions and all of the support were above board. So we have no reportable findings whatsoever on the topic of fraud. Moving along, I'll let Matt go through the next few pages.
Thanks very much, Carlos. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Do please stop me if you cannot. This page here does a great job of summarizing the areas of focus, those that we spend the most time on during the audit, other than those that Carlos touched upon with respect to our response to presumed fraud risks. Certainly, these are consistent year over year, as of course the library board's operations are consistent year over year. The investment portfolio and income related to it is a relatively straightforward piece of the file for us to audit, despite its relative materiality. The reason for that is because we are easily able to obtain third-party evidence to support those year-ending balances and in-year changes and results. So certainly we would not expect this to be an area where misstatements arise, which we did find to be the case. It was not an area of concern as we went through and very efficient for us to audit. I'll also note that part of the audit requires us to consider potential indicators of impairment over investments. This is more of a topic for a for-profit entity that would have a very aggressive investment strategy. Certainly, we're all aware that the market conditions lately have led to a downturn in general portfolio investments. The library's portfolio, however, is much lower risk, and certainly any potential downturn that we observe that is not realized, these investments will be held for a long time and are low risk. We expect those to make their way back as the greater market recovers. We have no, for accounting purposes, indications of impairment based on our analysis. So we did not propose any adjustment to the investment balances as reported. Moving on to tangible capital assets, as Jade mentioned earlier. Oh, sorry, we're still on the previous slide. As Jade mentioned earlier, this includes collections for the library. And again, this is an accounting concept under the public sector standards Those are all capitalized for accounting purposes and then expensed over time over a number of years. Our procedures involve making sure that that has been done correctly for public sector standards and that that amortization is appropriately calculated year to year. So no findings in that respect. Last item on this slide, grants from other government sources, including the main operating grant from the town. Much like investments, very easy for an external auditor to get comfortable and get the required level of support we need to form our opinion over revenue, because those are easy for us to get directly from the third parties. In the case of the town, certainly the close nature makes that a very quick procedure. And for third-party sources that are supported by agreements, again, those are all papered and made available to us directly from the third party. Moving on to page 8 now. You can see the largest section of these few slides touches on the post-employment benefit liability. In our audit plan, we would have mentioned that every few years, every 3 years to be precise, the library does engage a third-party actuary to renew their estimates and reports that allow management to estimate the future liabilities related to post-employment benefits for current and retired employees. Part of that involves us taking the data file that management provides to that third-party actuary and checking it against source records from the HR department to ensure that the data the actuary was provided is a valid and accurate point for them to use and complete their report. Otherwise, we also benchmark the key assumptions that the actuary uses in order to come to their conclusion, the most significant of which, of course, is the discount rate used to present value those future liabilities. You can see here that that rate doubled from the previous report, 2.5, now at 5%, which is reflective of the high inflationary environment that we all observe across greater markets. That is in line with what we have seen for comparable entities and our own benchmarks internally as well. So based on those assumptions being reasonable, the actuary report is a good starting point, and management has leveraged that in order to come up with the number on the financial statements for those liabilities. Lastly, I'll just touch quickly on operating expenses, including payroll and accruals related to year end. We do have procedures specific towards year-end cutoff, which are designed to identify any late invoices above that posting threshold. I think earlier in the report, in 7.1, it was noted there was a slight variance between the February number and the numbers that made it to the financials because of one item that came in between those 2 points. That was prior to the audit, and our procedure, which occurred later, did not identify any similar items which needed correction. We can move on to the next slide. This just reiterates the point Carlos made earlier. Our posting threshold is just over $16,000. So certainly a pretty granular deep dive that we take given the revenue and expenditures flowing through the library in any given year. So very good result that there's nothing above that threshold that we are required to report, and no corrected or uncorrected misstatements once again. We'll go to page 10. Carlos, I'll pass it back to you after making a short comment here, as I do want to have one last point on the next slide, but on this slide, the important thing to note is no significant changes. We've already said this year's statements and last year's statements would be very similar page to page. There is a mention here near the top that for public sector entities, there is an accounting standard related to asset retirement obligations that takes effect for the next fiscal year. This is not expected to have a significant impact whatsoever for the library, although a much larger discussion for other public sector entities, such as the town of Oakville itself.
And moving right along to the next slide. From a auditing standpoint, there was a new auditing standard, which was effective for 2022. This had very limited impact on your management team. This was more for audit practitioners and what we actually put in our audit file. So we implemented this audit standard with no issues to note to you. Moving along to page number 12. Actually, we can proceed to page number 13. So again, just to confirm Jade's comment that the independent report is a clean report. It is a clean report. It is, we refer to it as unqualified. I would also like to stress that as external auditors, it's very important for us to comment on independence. We as a firm of chartered accountants, we remained independent of the organization. We have not provided any other services that would threaten our independence. And one of the key lines in the sand that we always need to ensure that we never cross is that we never act in the capacity of management. And I can confirm to you that we maintained our independence throughout the entire audit period. So that would conclude what I would call the more significant points as part of the execution of the audit. And that would cover the big topics that we wanted to bring forward to your attention. And so with that, I will pause and back to you, the chair.
Thank you for the presentation. Members of the board, are there questions for our audit team? I'm not seeing any. You must have done a very thorough job. Thank you very much. I shouldn't say that because I do have a couple of very quick questions. I should probably know this, but how is our collection accounted for under PSAB? So is it just simply a matter of X number of books times standard average rate, or how do you account for such a large collection of materials in accounting for the asset?
So I can speak to that. The collections are capitalized at the same value that they're purchased for.
Okay.
That does not change. The only difference is instead of the expense that goes alongside that cash outflow flowing through 1 year, it is averaged over a number of years based on the useful life of those collections. And that is disclosed, I believe, in the notes to the financial statements. That is ultimately a policy choice, although the choice that the library has made is consistent with what we consider normal for similar entities. The calculation itself is actually quite straightforward.
Okay. What does ARO stand for, the new ARO standard?
That stands for Asset Retirement Obligation. And if I can use the simplest example, for buildings that were constructed in the 1960s and 1970s, asbestos was commonly used as insulation. Even if that building is being used today, because that building has a limited life, that new standard now would prescribe that because there's a limited life on that asset, that when that asset comes to the end of its useful life, you will have to remove that asbestos, and that will cost X amount of money. And so that new standard would suggest that you would have to estimate the cost of that removal and include that in your financial statements, even though the asset is still being used.
So you used the example of asbestos. Are there specific examples in the case of the library world that you would apply this to beyond building materials?
Another example would be with leases.
Okay.
So the standard would force you to look at all of your lease contracts. And if you had a leased space, and I'll use the example of a space that has 2 floors and an organization added a stairwell. In some lease agreements, it would actually say that the leasee would be required to return that space to the landlord in its original condition. And so in this example, there may be a cost for removing that stairwell that was put into that space. And that's another example that would fall under the scope of the new standard.
Okay. So I understand what you mean by this is more impactful on the municipality rather than the library itself, since most of the assets are held by the municipal corporation. And where does, I know that some of these standards come from the Auditors Association. Where does this standard come from? Is this government mandated? Is it industry where does it come about?
This is a Canadian accounting standard.
Okay.
That would be issued by effectively CPA Canada, and this is embedded in the public sector accounting guidelines.
Okay, terrific. And last question I have for you is, I don't believe that your firm is involved in auditing cybersecurity risk at all, are you?
We provide cybersecurity support, such as maturity assessments, which means we would come in and look at what is the lay of the land today and outline, key risks, vulnerabilities. So certainly we have a advisory team that provides cyber support on a as needed basis. And so that is a service we do provide, but that would be separate from a financial statement audit.
Right, so it's not included in your current engagement.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to the board for any last minute questions before we approve the material before us. I'm not seeing any. Okay, members of the board, I want to turn your attention to 7.1 and 7.2. The action on 7.1 is to approve the draft statements. So I would look for a motion to approve the draft statements as presented. Thank you very much. Rebecca, you moved seats on me, so I'm all messed up. Can I get a seconder for that motion, please? Thank you, Avis. Appreciate that. All in favor of the approval of the draft statements? Thank you. The second matter of business is, let me just get to the page here. The second matter of business is the receipt of the audit findings report. Can I get that motion, please? Somebody, Celso, seconded by? Anybody want to give me a shot? Rod, thank you very much. Further comments or questions on that matter? Seeing none, that is also approved. Thank you very much. Thank you, Audit Pals. We appreciate your presentation again this year. We look forward to seeing you again next year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Members of the board, sticking with the finance theme, we move to 7.3. That's the comprehensive financial report as at March 31st, 2023.
Yeah, so there are some key highlights that are under key facts. So as of March 31st, OPL is projecting approximately just over $200,000 in a surplus by the end of the year. It's still obviously early days with the first quarter. The development reserve, so that is where, as we do development and fundraising, that is where the cash goes. And right now we are projecting a year-end balance of, again, over $200,000. The HIP trust, this is something that we haven't really dug into too much with the new board. The Halton Information Providers is a organization, an entity that exists within OPL. We are the lead partner, but it's made up of 4 other organizations. There's 5 of us. And we support the Halton Information Providers, the Community Services Database. The 4 libraries, as well as an agency within Milton, maintain those records and provide that service out to the community. We also have data contracts with 211 and other agencies that bring in some revenue to that, and that's why there's a separate financial piece to that. So the HIP trust is projecting a year-end balance of $60,000. One thing that's not in the key facts, but I did want to highlight, is that at the end of this report is an overview of all our current capital projects. There are a number of them that have been in progress for a little bit that we are hoping by the time you get the Q2 to have closed a number of these. That way we can really focus on the ones that are ongoing and not just, an example of that would be the Library Strategic Plan. Library Strategic Plan is fundamentally complete. There's just been some collateral items that we've been doing out of that in terms of like just printing booklets, but we're looking to close that, for just to give you an example of one that's been in there for a little bit and we are about to close. There's a number of them. So we're gonna, by Q2, that should be a much more condensed list about where our areas of focus are right now. But again, happy to take questions on the Q1 financials.
Thank you. Questions? Andrew?
Yes, the overage on purchase Thank you. The overage on purchased services of 328,000, you note that it includes janitorial services, professional fees and contracted services, and it's estimated to go over budget for continued touch point cleaning costs. However, the service will likely be stopped soon with COVID no longer being considered a public health emergency. So I agree with the last part of that statement, but this, those costs were not new. I'm wondering if you can break down the difference between those added touch point cleaning costs versus extraordinary maintenance costs that we have incurred, such as at Central.
So we need to go back a little bit. So the touch point cleaning it, and I might have to revisit your question, so correct me if I'm not understanding it. Initially, as part of supporting all departments, including library with COVID, there was one-time COVID funding for these types of aspects. But as of last year, the town removed that money, and so we had to continue to pay for it out of our existing, which we didn't have the budget for, but we knew we were running surpluses, particularly with personnel. So we went into this year knowing that would be an overage. Is that aspect, like we essentially budgeted for the overage. Now, we have actually ended that daytime cleaning. That daytime cleaning will end as of June 1st, so it should even out a little bit through the end of the year because that overage will stop. And that was kind of how we planned for this year.
Okay. So the next financial update, we'll be able to get a better metric toward the end of the year? Okay.
Yeah.
And then can you just give us an idea of what proportion of that would be related to extraordinary maintenance and repair costs? Like outside of the touch point enhanced cleaning?
So sorry, what are you asking?
Okay, so on page 64,
Yep,
the second to last paragraph,
yep.
last sentence, contracted maintenance costs and repairs and maintenance are also estimated to be higher primarily at Central.
So what is driving some of that?
So what proportion of that overage is coming from those added maintenance costs?
I can't give you that number right off the top of my head. Belinda, we can always get back to you.
Yep, Tara, I can answer that. It's about half of it. We have come into quite a lot of repairs at Central, not associated with the water leakage, more around boiler repairs that had to be done, elevator repairs, just things that added up quite a bit. So I would say that about of that overage, about half of it is related to repairs and maintenance costs.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Which leads to the question I'll ask, are we expecting to see that number balloon with once the costs of the water leak are factored into, or was that covered through insurance, or how was that managed?
Yeah, so the majority of that is covered through insurance. That's still in progress. Joe had a really good meeting with the adjuster earlier today, but we still are waiting on final approval about what we can the actual fundamental, like the drywalling, the carpet, all that's been completed, and that was all covered under insurance. Right now, we're waiting on the finalization of the furniture that needs to be replaced. And the biggest one for us is the cost of the sorter, because the insurance company required multiple quotes and is really taking a look at the cost of that sorter. But we're really hoping that we'll get the okay to be able to repurchase that quickly, because it is generally an issue because people can't return books when the branch is closed from the Water Street entrance. They have to do it up top, and that's been an ongoing issue. So,
and that return mechanism, that sorter was completely ruined?
It was basically a waterfall in and out of it.
Oh, wow.
And the replacement cost is roughly $60,000, which explains why the insurance company really wanted to take a hard look at whether or not it could be repaired. But the recommendation was, even if they could get it going, it could go a week later or 3 weeks later, that the water damage was significant enough that even if they got it started, it didn't have its full life left.
Okay, thank you. Further questions for Tara? Oh, go ahead, Rebecca. Meredith, sorry.
I noted the surplus on administrative services related to the vacancy in the EA role. And so it's a surplus, but not a great surplus, because I know it's probably resulting in extra duress on the leadership team, so I just want to check in that how the progress of that and that is on track to get filled.
So we have completed interviews for that position, and we are hoping to begin negotiations with the successful candidate next week. So we're really hoping that that'll be filled in June.
Thank you, Meredith. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, can I get a motion? Meredith, would you mind giving me a motion on that, please, to receive the report? Thank you. Seconded by? Thank you, Andrew. All in favor? That's carried. Okay. Moving on to 7.4, this is the updated policy on political use of space and resources. We sent it back with some comments last time. This is the report that provides us with the policy for our approval. Are there any comments or questions on this? Did you want to frame it at all, or before we?
It's exactly what you said. We adjusted the political use of space and resources policy based on your comment about political use, particularly for elected officials. So we matched the wording to the rest of the policy, and I think that works better. And for the customer code of conduct, we took Rod's comments into account and readjusted that statement. So the verb tense flows a little bit better. But those were the two updates to those two.
For what it's worth, I just want to say I'm perfectly satisfied with the changes you've made to accommodate us elected folks, so thank you for that. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the policy? Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Rebecca. All in favor? That's carried. I know if I keep saying Rebecca enough, I'm going to hit the right person. 7.5 is a program development and delivery policy update.
So with all the work that we've been doing on the political use of space and resources, the customer code of conduct, it really came to our attention that our program development and delivery policy probably could use an update as well. And that specifically relates to a process for reconsideration. We already have this process established as part of our collection development policy. It's been there for as long as that collection policy has been in place, at least over a decade, and really provides a clear process for members of the public who have concerns about our collections, a very clear process to be able to submit. There's a form they have to fill out. They have to provide us with exactly why they want us to reconsider, and those kind of aspects. We do get a significant number of those every year, and the process works really, really well. And I anticipate that programming, we have had some conversations about it, and I expect that to grow. And so having a similar process in place just provides clarity for the public and for staff to put it through a very structured process about what that looks like. It also enables, if the staff are answering questions in the branch, not to necessarily engage, but redirect them here, because there's a very clear set of steps for both the resident to take and for us to take, and how we respond, and really kind of outlines the expectations, which I think serves that whole process a little bit better.
Would you mind, before I ask for questions, would you mind just giving us an example of how this policy would be applied? Can you provide a case study from one of the applications of this form and this process that's been used in the past?
Yeah, so this is relatively new to public libraries. There are growing numbers of public libraries that have put this in place. We haven't had a significant pushback on our programming yet. However, we are offering a number of programs in June that I suspect could start that conversation. But I have seen, for example, in Richmond Hill, they had a very strong individual come in. They were doing I think it was an Urdu story time, and the person insisted that it stop and that they should never be doing that, and the story time should be in English, and English only. So again, this would enable them, for staff to direct them to this, outline their concerns, and us be able to address the specific concerns that they're bringing forward, and being able to highlight that we offered this single Urdu story time in honor of a certain kind of day or event, but 99% of all our story times are in English, which is a whole separate conversation that maybe they should have. But just those types of issues, as well as things related to the 2S LGBTQ community. We've had comments about some of the programs that we held for Seek Heritage Month. I got some inquiries. They're very light at the moment, but just given the environment that we're in, at any moment they could intensify, and just having a process in place, I think would simplify things and just create clarity on both sides.
Makes sense. Members of the board, any questions on this? Yes, Celso.
There's a suggestion on the new paragraph that you added, the request to reconsider library programs. It does outline what the process is. My suggestion is to add a statement that says the decisions will be made on the grounds of the policy statement, so that there's no confusion as to what is the criteria for making those decisions. Because the policy is very clear at the top of it that it's based on diversity and a bunch of other good things. So if you put in there that the decisions are going to be based on those grounds, I think it will give a little more clarity on it's not subject to someone's thought process, you know what I mean?
Okay.
It's just a suggestion. And also, another one there is, it says that a final decision will be made by the CEO. That makes sense. This is just a paranoia. You may want to say something that is, once the decision is done, it's done. It's not going to go back and you can't fill another form and keep coming, you know?
Right.
That sort of thing. Just two suggestions.
Yep.
Thank you. Meredith?
Just a quick, the Appendix C, the collection development policy, were there any changes to the previous iteration of that policy, or was that just included just for our reference?
I just included it in there just for that you had an example of where it's already been existing practice, just for that you could see that we're basically following the exact same.
Okay.
Yep.
Just a comment on this. I don't believe that the Film Classifications Act exists anymore. It's referenced in here, I believe.
In the collection development?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I
We'll
believe
look at that.
the province has eliminated that, and so there is no more film classification. I know
Okay.
that applies to the movie theater industry, but I believe that the Film Classification Act was rescinded,
Okay.
which has been very odd because we use the British Columbia film classification standards now,
Yeah.
which British Columbia doesn't appreciate since we don't pay for them. But anyway, if you could maybe have a look into that and make sure that it's relevant.
Yeah, I can do that.
And maybe if the same rules apply to multimedia materials in terms of that act being rescinded, maybe look at what your policy will be in terms of self-classifying materials and what standard you'd use.
Right.
Because I know that once again, relating back to my own industry, that's something we've had to do. So we use the British Columbia standard, or the British Columbia rating system.
Yep.
Further comments, questions? Ray?
Jeff, just a question with respect to the policies of program delivery and so forth. And I'll be honest, I don't know all the specific policies. But what happens in a situation where there is a contentious issue of program delivery that doesn't meet the interpretation of the policy? Is there an appeal process by the public to come back to management or to the board on the governance side of it? Is there any appeal process?
So for the policy itself?
Yeah, is there any?
There's not necessarily a process. They would normally, if they have concerns and they bring that up, just say they bring it up in a branch, they can provide a feedback that, normally for any policy concerns, that would come almost directly to me, in which I would address if I thought that it was a, I don't want to use the word valid, but it was something that we needed to incorporate in there, then we would make that update and bring it back to the board. We have had people question our policies. The last one was our inclusion policy. They didn't like it. I said, this is the inclusion policy. If they wanted to change the inclusion policy, they needed to come to the board, and they chose not to do that. But they are welcome to delegate to the board on that issue if they need to.
Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments or questions on this particular item? Thank you. Rebecca?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify something, also that you said actually about if somebody makes an appeal or, fills out the form and then that's final, they're allowed to appeal again, right? Like they can fill out the form again? Or do you just, obviously that's discouraged, but we wouldn't in any way say to someone, you can't.
They could fill it out again. If it comes to me again, the answer is going to be the same.
Right.
The thing that I would have to put in is they could always come to the board. The board could choose to overrule. However, for the sake of this, it's easier for me to handle operations than for every kind of request that come to the board, but it really depends on how that conversation ends, and just how adamant they are that issue be addressed. And sometimes we do remind them that these are board-approved policies. These are not management-approved policies. And so as such, sometimes it will be appropriate for them to come to the board and kind of present their concerns and it be addressed at a board level.
Thank you.
Without going through my handy consolidation of the board bylaws, which I don't have here, are there any specific guidelines as to how things come to the board in with respect to this? So are we actually, do we need to add something to this policy to actually stipulate that in the event of a disagreement with the outcome, that the proponent can appeal the decision to the board?
I can take a look and see if there's examples of how that phrasing is. I'm hesitant to make it two because I don't want, again, everything to come to the board when it could stop here. That's not to say that avenue isn't always available. I am the employee of the board, but there's probably wording that we could put in there that fleshes that out a little bit more. There is. And this is actually, I'm not going to lie, this has been a topic on the CULC listserv, because there have been recently people who have skipped management and gone right to the board and sent letters to the board and wanting a response directly from the board. And so that's never really happened too much before. So there's some concern about how that actually, who actually responds, who writes the response. So that hasn't happened here, and I'm hoping they'll work some of that out and we'll just adopt it. Right now for the board and the bylaws, there is members of the public can delegate, and that's primarily the way they would do that.
Right, but delegation doesn't mean that the board would have the authority, the responsibility to overrule a decision by the CEO. Just a suggestion. I think, and my colleagues can tell me if I'm out to lunch here, but I think that should be written in here, not just for the sake of clarity, but also for the sake of cover for you and your staff, because that takes the onus and takes the target off your back. I mean, we are the corporate embodiment of the organization, so I think the buck has to stop here ultimately at the end of the day, which is kind of the way it is at council. I know there's lots of procedures on how things get to council, so maybe we should follow that same kind of procedure. And again, it takes a lot of pressure off. I think you should definitely be the main decision maker.
Right.
But there should be a process, and it should be spelled out to take it to the board rather than leaving it. I preface my comment by saying that I didn't know maybe there's something in the bylaw already, so perhaps some research. And then some potential wording be brought back with the final iteration.
Yeah, we can look into that for sure.
Ray, you had your hand up.
Jeff, you hit it right on the nose. That's where I was going with this, with respect to it, is protection of the management and so forth. The only question, we have to be careful with this type of appeal process, is that it's not, you could have a lot coming to the board. I don't know what the propensity of it is, but I'm just saying in future, if we're having appeals, there might be an idea that you might have a middle group of an appeals group. It doesn't have to come to the board. It might be just an appeals group or committee to deal with those. But at the end of the day, it's a challenge not to supersede what your decisions are based on the policy. So that's where, and I think you're absolutely right. It is the board's policy and blah, 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 and end of story. But I don't want to belabor the point, but what Jeff's saying is we need to put that in just to cover all the bases.
I can say anecdotally that in the many, many years I've either served or chaired this board, I think we've had two appeals come to the board. And we have upheld the staff's recommendations on both of them. So I don't think it's going to happen that frequently. But in this new anti-woke, I hate using the word woke, but this new culture that's sort of growing up around us, I could see that you may be put in an awkward position from time to time, and it's good to have backup on that.
That's exactly what the trend is going.
Exactly. Sadly, very sadly. Okay, members of the board, I'll come back to you for one more round of questions if you have any, and if not, then we will approve, or I guess this is a receive, right? This is a receive.
This is a receive for feedback, yes.
Okay, motion to receive, please. Thank you, Celso, seconded by. Thank you, Rod. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Performance and measures report for Q4 2022.
Yes, and some may notice it.
Oh, and sorry. Yeah, Q4 2022. Why is
But
it-
no, this is the one with the wrong subject
Yeah, okay,
that I
okay.
apologize for. It is
totally
Q1 of
confused me.
2023.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Again, I apologize. Again. It's what happens when you just copy over reports sometimes. So you had before you the Q1 Performance and Measures Report for 2023. As requested when we brought the year end for 2024, we did include the 2019, which is the last real full year outside of 2023 to provide comparisons for. And you can definitely see the difference. So for example, physical circulation, if we just looked from last year to this year, you're seeing an increase, but over from 2019 to today, there is a decrease of about 14%. And there is a significant increase in digital that it wouldn't be reflected from 1 year, but is definitely reflected over the length of time. Overall, and we've discussed this a little bit, we're trending really well, I think, for recovery, but we are starting to see trends that are very different from what we were seeing pre-COVID, and really looking to dig into why that is. We're still playing around with programs and program times, virtual versus in person. I think we're definitely seeing more success with that, identifying for different groups. Book clubs being an example that I think we've settled into a really solid mix of in-person and virtual that work for people, because virtual is generally more accessible, especially in the winter. People may not want to leave their homes, they may not be able to leave their homes, but then there are people who really miss the camaraderie that happens at our book clubs and really wanted it to be in person. So we've been working hard to figure out what the right combination of that is. We continue to work with teens, and coming out of COVID, teens were very focused on virtual programming, but we've started to see a little bit of shift in that, and our recent carnival is a great example of that. That was a massive success. Staff are still riding the high of that at White Oaks, and just the comments and just excitement that the teens had for that. So I think it's helping us really identify what programs are really working for in-person and what will continue to work in virtual. So we continue to look at these statistics, but things still continue to shift in a post-COVID world where we really look at what is the new reality for a lot of people. But happy to answer any questions.
Questions, board? Meredith.
First of all, thank you for providing the pre-pandemic. That is so helpful to see how far we've come relative to our last full year. And also kudos to the growth in circulation. It's great to see that generally there is more, material being used by more residents, and so I think that's to be celebrated. I had a question about the items printed, and I saw that it's definitely, a little less than half of what it was pre-pandemic. And I recall a conversation that we had earlier about the significant downtime of the printers. And just wondering if there was any update about the uptime of printers and being that service accessible to residents.
Good question.
My understanding is that new ones were installed today. So that is something that we've really been having strong conversations about. As you know, we had a report, and so it is something that we've been working really closely with ITS about. So hopefully through the next 2 and a little bit quarters, we'll kind of see whether or not that is going to poke up, or whether or not people have now found other ways, and whether we'll get that traffic back. So that'll be interesting for the rest of the year, and something we'll continue to monitor to make sure that what the new ones that they do function the way we hope they will.
Is there any operational change to the new printing system?
No.
Same thing? Put your money in, get your printing out? Pardon me?
It's coins.
There's still coins?
Yeah.
Oh.
It is on our list to look at introducing a whole new system, but that's a significant change for us.
I don't think I've had a coin in my pocket for 4 years.
Yeah. They can, it's coin when it's completely independent. However, they can use the debit machine or the credit machine for staff. It's just that then it starts to require staff intervention.
Yeah, because you'd have to go from debit.
And then they have to the staff have to place a code in the machine.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any further questions on this report? Andrew? And we have a bunch, actually. So we'll go Andrew, Avis, and then Rod.
I'm really curious if you have any insight into the decline in e-magazines from 2019 to 2023. So it's declined 81%. Not
So what page is, that's
Page-
on page 3?
113.
113.
Yeah, page 3 of the report.
I'm not entirely sure offhand, but I can definitely look into that for you.
Just seeing, the e-newspapers have increased, movies, e-learning, everything. So magazine seems to be the only thing that's not seeing the boom, so.
That's gone down. I don't know if we've changed platforms. I can't remember. We did change platforms at one point. I just don't remember what year it was. And e-magazines, actually, we were having a conversation about print magazines today, because our print magazine collection is shrinking drastically. It seems like every week there's a bunch of them, but there is also instability in e-magazines because they move online, and some of them do it really well and some of them don't do it really well. But we can look into that, and I can get back to you with just a bit more detail about what may be driving that.
Okay.
Avis, you're up.
Yes, just also curious about the foot traffic trends. When I would expect if the digital circulation is going up, perhaps there's less people actually coming into the library. But between 22 and 23, foot traffic reduced, but physical circulation went up. Is there anything explaining that particular trend?
What we actually saw during COVID is that foot traffic, once we were open, foot traffic dropped, but what it was is like one person would come in where like the whole family used to come in. And so I think that was driving that. And that's a question that we kind of have is where does some of that sit? We now do like grab and go bags for a bunch of different varieties. So rather than, coming in on a Saturday as a mom just running in, grabbing a couple grab and go bags for her kids' age group and running out versus maybe having them come and select them themselves could definitely be a driver to that. I was actually surprised that it's still down 2% because if you're in our branches, they are packed right now. And so that's something that we're really hoping to grow by the end of the year and actually get back into the green.
Thank you.
I guess speakers list, I'll put you on it. Rod's next.
Yes, this is a wonderful set of stats, and I'd just like to riff off what Meredith said. It's great to see 2019 compared to the current year. The one I was a bit curious about, if you have insights on website sessions down 22% over that span, but BiblioCommons up quite a bit. And of course, they have similar access features to them. Where do you see that going, and how can you explain just those two?
I don't. Do you have any? About why the website, yeah, but I guess it's up from last year, but it's still down from 2019.
The audience can't hear you when you speak from your seat. Perhaps you could pop up.
We did introduce a new website back in 2020. We might have to dig into this a little bit, but it's the website is getting less hits than it did in 2019, but more than it did from last year.
So I believe that it's because of, the previous website in 2019 was the old website, where it was not mobile friendly. It was a completely different experience, night and day rebuilt. In the past, you had to go and you had search numerous things. Like, it was very hard to navigate and very hard to find. Whereas today, you can it's one-time search, and you can go in and find what you need. We also link directly, so we use a lot of like QR codes, a lot of things to send people directly where they want to go versus into the homepage to find different things. So the strategy of how we've done it since 2020, since we've switched the website, has completely changed. So you can see by like the BiblioCommons session, even the growth from last year, where we're growing, a lot more people are using it. But again, the independent one, it would be down. It would be down from 2019 because it's a completely different bill.
Okay. Thank you very much.
It's comparing apples to oranges. They're not the same.
It would also be, I'm BiblioCommons also, our book lists are held in BiblioCommons. So that's something that we've really been pushing both through our newsletter, if you get our newsletter, if you'll sign up. The staff have been really digging into providing book lists for all kinds, and those go directly into BiblioCommons. So if you're clicking on a book list, then that could also drive some of that. And there are, of course, people that bookmark just BiblioCommons and bypass our website completely because they're just interested in borrowing a book.
Rebecca?
My comment was sort of to what Mavis was asking about in terms of foot traffic as opposed to the borrowing of books. And that I'll just speak to my own personal, how I borrow books now is I order them through the website, which is amazing now.
Yep.
And then just run in and grab them. So all of us, see something that we like, so I make a list and then I just order them all on the website, run in and grab them exactly like what you said. So I'll just validate that just from my own personal experience.
Yeah, the search is much better, and I think allows people to do that much easier.
Well, and I think just over COVID as well, I think the books took off again, right?
Yes.
And so there's, whether it's to me or my kids or whoever it is, we all see books and we get excited about them, and then so the experience has changed, but I just wanted to add that, so 5 minutes later.
Thank you. Meredith?
And maybe further to that, so we're seeing circulation go up. We're seeing footfall go down pretty substantially, but we're seeing circulation go up in a variety of different ways, whether it's digital content, whether it's online ordering. And so when I look at the circulation by branch, I'm curious if there's, for some of the ones who have the smaller circulations and declining, does the library is there a certain threshold where it looks at, maybe this neighborhood would be better serviced rather than with staff than with a kiosk, because that's just the new trend as to how people are accessing the content is different.
So there is books are still a really important part of libraries. But part of that is, and libraries have growing importance of that as that third space in the community. So the challenge that we have is it's really hard to correlate circulation with foot traffic, because we'll have people come in and sit in our branch all day and not borrow a thing. They'll come in and they'll study, they'll come in and they'll work, they'll come in and read the newspaper, they'll come in and hang out with their child. So it's foot traffic and circulation don't always correlate. That's not to say that we're always looking at new areas that may be better supported by a kiosk. The master plan, that's one of the really things that we're asking them to look at, and they're getting all this circulation. We're actually meeting with them next week to really go over all our statistics to see what trends they see that we may not. Because they're looking not just at Oakville, but a bit more broad for that. So those are questions that we have. But interestingly enough, one thing I was going to mention as part of my CEO update is we've been doing a lot of public consultation for the master plan. And what I hear over and over and over again is the libraries aren't big enough. We need more space and we need more hours. And I found that really interesting, and I'm excited to see how the master plan will take that. The public consultation, that's what I heard multiple times, is there's not enough room for kids to study. Or the alternate side is there's no space for us. It's all filled with teens studying. Where's our space? And then also that we need longer and extended hours, that 1 to 5 on a Sunday isn't good enough. That closing at 6 o'clock or 5 or 6 on a Friday isn't good enough. So it'll be interesting to see from those public consultations what comes out in the survey and other kind of aspects for that, but where else we can provide support and then maybe rethink. I think we're coming to a point where we're going to have to rethink what our branches are and what they do. Yeah.
Can you repeat that last sentence that you just said?
I said we're coming to a point where we're going to have to rethink what our branches are and what our branches do.
Okay. Any further questions? Celso?
So I see LinkedIn Learning as one of the digital vendors that we use. I know what LinkedIn Learning does, but I don't understand how it works in the context of the library.
So if you have a library card, you have full access to LinkedIn Learning. Right? So people go in and they do certificates, people go in and take all the training. So if your employer has it, you can get it for free through the library.
I see.
So it's been, a couple of years ago, I was living in an apartment building not far from Central, and there was a family of 5 next door, and the oldest son would sit at Central for 6 or 7 hours a day. And one day I asked him, and that's what he was doing, is he was just taking online classes. He was working at the Ford plant, and he wanted to move beyond that, and so he would just come in and he would just because you get certificates at the end that you can actually put on your resume. So that's an example.
Do you need a
of how it's
library
used.
card in order to use it?
You need a library card, yes. Yeah. But it's definitely one of the things that we've been talking about a little bit more, because I think there's a lot of businesses in Oakville who are paying for LinkedIn Learning that don't necessarily need to pay for LinkedIn Learning, because their staff can get a card through the library.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I can tell you one business.
There's a lot of town staff that didn't know that, so we've been pumping it here too.
I can tell you one business that doesn't pay for lynda.com or LinkedIn Learn anymore. But this is one of the things that, for the public and for members of the board, one of the lesser known gems is our electronic services. And LinkedIn Learning, which used to be called lynda.com, is a tremendous resource. I've been a big advocate for this for years, but there's other amazing databases that you would otherwise pay significantly for access, and they're available for the price of nothing, the library card, right? Just your tax dollars. So you should definitely take advantage of that. Further questions? If not, okay. So I want to dig into the website thing just a little bit more. Sorry, Joe. I wonder if we could maybe actually take a bit of a deeper dive into this, because intuitively, BiblioCommons lives within our web offerings. So that should really be counted, I think, in our website. And we have so many people using BiblioCommons, we have so many people using the digital assets we're talking about, and for many of those cases, they're jumping off from the website.
Correct.
Not always, because I know
Not
they
always.
can make a link directly, but many are. So I'm wondering what's bypassing. If somebody has a link directly to LinkedIn Learning on the website, is that triggering a use on the website, or are we only indexing the main page, the home page? So I'd like a deeper dive, and there's a couple reasons why. One, it doesn't make any sense that we're down 44 or 22%. We should be going up in that sense. I mean, when you look at digital offerings, they're up 434%, which is astounding. And BiblioCommons is up 33%. Our website being down 22% doesn't make any sense unless there's some oddity in the way that the metrics are being calculated, how the usage statistics are being calculated. The other piece of this is we just spent a fortune on our new website. And I'd like to know that if it's not getting used, why is it not getting used? Because maybe there's something that our customers are not enjoying in the process. So if it's truly not being used and we're seeing a decline in 22% when digital offerings are generally through the roof, we should probably do a deeper dive to find out there's something that some need we're not meeting. I thought our website's awesome. I think it is, but it'd be nice to know more about that, because that statistic is the only one on there that really jumps out and surprises me.
Yeah, we can dig into that.
It very well be, like I said, it may very well be just in the way that it's calculated based on the other things being parsed out. So maybe the reporting has to be slightly different.
Yeah, and one of the things that Joe and I have a conversation about is even how we're doing statistic gathering from the website and how we're connecting into other things. Because you're right, like if I want to go to Hoopla per se, I don't have to go through the library website to get there once you've signed up once. You can go straight to Hoopla and just log in with your card. So they're still using our service and it's being counted under Hoopla, but if I know that I want Hoopla, I don't have to go through that extra step if I don't want to. And there's a number of services that do that. Which doesn't give a holistic picture of what's happening. You're right.
And if that's the case, then that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. And Meredith just whispered something that I thought is a worthwhile thing to look into as well, is that we're not seeing any statistics on app usage here. So could we get a bit of a sense of where that app usage is? Because maybe if you add the app usage in the website sessions, you're back up to positive.
So we stopped doing that because the vendor stopped giving it to us. So I think the App Store no longer gives us, I mean, we can get it from the app itself, but the App Stores no longer provide us with data.
So the app stores protect users. So we don't know how many actual active users are on each app. We have what they're checking out and we have usage information, but we don't know like usage in total. And we don't get access to a lot of the stats because they're all protected
Are we the developer, or is there a third-party
No,
developer?
they're all third-party.
Because I know that, like, I have apps on both the App Store, Apple App Store, and the Google Play Store, and I know they don't give you email addresses, but they certainly give you statistics in terms of the number of sessions, et cetera. So I'm wondering if we can, maybe, I think the whole thing deserves a deeper dive anyway.
Yeah. Again, we can pull specific statistics, but in terms of like usages, like who has it on their phone, downloads, like that we don't have for sure. We've inquired many times.
So do we have like, for example, in the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, do we actually have a login to go into those two stores? Because if you do, then you can get those statistics.
I can double check, but we don't own the app. It's just skinned for OPL. So I would have to triple check that.
You might want to consider becoming the developer, not the actual developer, but getting a developer access to those accounts so you can get those stats. Celso?
Yeah, another way to go about that is to have something in the app that tracks that and provides you with that information.
Yeah, we can definitely talk to, because BiblioCommons provides the app, and that's that third party. So we can talk to them about that. I think we've met with them rather recently, so we'll bring that up.
I mean, I'm speaking generally. I have a third-party app. One of our apps is a third-party app. But we actually asked specifically, can we hold the developer access for that as well, or be one of the developers on that instance so we could actually go in and track stats?
Yeah, okay.
Because those metrics are important to understand if your investment's worth it.
And yeah, and it's good to know to at least ask. So if they're saying no, us to understand why they're saying no and what their concern is and how they're going to then provide us with theirs, because that means they should be able to get it at the very least and pass it to us.
Again, if it's an Apple app, Apple protects everything. You can't get names, but you can certainly get the number of unique visits and things like that. So, anyway, I believe that the website, because of our investment in the website and all this technology, we really need a deeper dive on the usage to break that out in statistics. It's going to become, well, it's already incredibly important, the digital offerings. It's going to become even more important to understand how our customers are interacting with us and get a clear picture of it for the sake of making decisions about future investment. Because if people aren't going to use websites, maybe we don't put as much into the website in the future kind of thing. So, but I don't think that's the case.
Right. Yep, we can do that.
Just my 2 cents worth. Now that I've spent my 2 cents, does any other board member have any loose change, or are we ready to pass this receipt? Okay, motion to receive the report, please. Thank you. Thank you. All in favor? That's carried. Ready to need some water?
No, I need new lungs.
Okay. Motion for new lungs. CEO update.
Bring it up. So just to start a brief update with North Park, or the permanent 16-mile branch. So the last update, there was a successful proponent for the tender. The town is in current negotiations with them around cost. There is a report that will be going to council in June. Based on that report, I will provide an update in July about the status of that project. The master plan, as I said, April and May have really been filled with meetings with counselors, with our community groups, with public consultations. Last week, I think we had 6 or 7 public consultations. Got to have some really good conversations with members of the public that we'll be then incorporating into the Parks, Recreation, and Facilities Master Plan. I will continue to pump the survey. If you haven't filled it out individually, and you please do. If you have friends and family in Oakville, please do that. I think we're over 1,800, which is a pretty solid number, but if we can get over like 2,000 and above, that would be fantastic. So just in case anybody's interested, they can reach out and I can provide them a link. But Pilar Martinez, who's the CEO of Edmonton, and Osa Cashin, who's the CEO of Halifax Public Library, are giving a session at the Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention as part of their Community of Practice collection just on safety measures in public libraries. This is definitely a growing concern. We've had this conversation. We see little blips here in Oakville, but it's definitely surrounding us. So this is definitely a major part of conversations that are happening, not just in Canada, but in North America right now, and how we can do a better job of still being a place of belonging and a welcoming place, but how do we balance that with an increased number of incidents that we're seeing within our walls? As Jeff mentioned early on, we are doing a pollinator garden at Woodside. We are working with Parks and Open Spaces and Oakville Green to select, prepare, and maintain this garden. Once we have more details about when it will be complete, will be given to the board. We're very excited to announce that we've received a community services grant of just over $98,000 in order to implement our elder and residents program. This is a main focus of our strategic plan under the Enrich Lives and Build Healthy Communities. We're very excited to be able to bring this to life and have it funded in a way that I think will make it truly successful. The primary usage for the dollars will be in paying for the elder and their assistant and having them available in the branch to run programming and just be available as a community resource as well. So look forward to that. As we have a better sense of what that will look like, we'll be bringing board updates, but we just got news that we got that grant, so we're really excited about that. We also received a Bronte BIA activation grant for the Library on the Go book bike that will be stationed under the sails again this year. So this year, last year we just had this single bike and it was mostly stationary at Bronte. This year we're expanding it. We have 3 bikes. One will remain here in Bronte. The other 2 will actually be driving around Oakville, setting up in different parks, running programs. We're really working really closely with Recreation and Culture to have our book bikes visit their day camps when they're out in parks, and really in our effort to be more where the public is. So they're part programming and they're part marketing, and they will be supported by the summer students that we got through our Canada Summer Grant Program. They started last week, and we're really excited to get them out in the public. But this one here, we are expanding what we're doing with the Bronte BIA. So the bike will continue to be there. It will be stocked with friendly fines. So people are welcome to take the books. There's a tip tap there, so people are welcome to donate it to us as well. But we're also increasing our services there by introducing programming that will also be part of this bike. So we're excited about that. It was a huge hit last year, and when we toyed with the idea of pulling it out, there was a little bit of an outcry. So definitely back in Bronte for this. And then the third grant, we just received one from Canada Heritage, which is the Celebrate Canada grant, which is to support our first Bannock Bake Off. I'm super excited. When I worked at Regina Public Library, I always volunteered to be a judge for their annual Bannock Bake Off, my favorite time of the year. So we're partnering with Tepwaywen Insights, Oakville Community Foundation, and the town of Oakville to host this event. It will happen during June, which is Indigenous History Month. We just received the grant, so we are scrambling a little bit to get this planned for June, but as soon as we have details on it, we'll provide it to the board. I'm very excited to bring this event to Oakville. Public access laptops. So libraries have had public access computers, which are desktop, for a very long time. But we have seen usage shift with the desktops in particular. And so we are trying to create a more fluid and mobile model for this. So we're introducing public access laptops. It provides the same service as desktops, but allows the branches to be more flexible in their spaces and not necessarily having to have desks with desktops installed, but rather people can come and borrow a laptop and sit wherever they want within the space. It just provides more flexibility. So they've launched at Woodside and White Oaks and will be rolled out to the other branches in the coming weeks or months. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we held our first Teen Carnival, which is our version of a Comic-Con at White Oaks Branch in early May, and it was a significant success. We had over 40 teens in attendance. The feedback has been really, really great. I was talking with Emma Primo, who is the manager of that branch, about witnessing the connections that were made between teens. In particular, she mentioned this one individual who had just moved to Oakville and didn't really have any friends and decided that she would just come and find like, and she left with a crew. And I think that's one great thing about, particularly about Comic-Con events, is it really gives people kind of like that shared passion and that shared interests. If you like D&D, everybody's welcome to D&D. So I think it was really lovely to kind of have that space that's a very welcoming community. So I'm really excited, and they'll be looking to continue to grow that moving forward, I think.
Knowing you, I understand why you're so excited about this.
It was just, yes, I was so excited, and to hear about all the teens and how excited that they were for that. And then finally, Pride programming, so coming in June, just some kind of a highlights of what we're hosting. We're hosting a Faye and Fluffy story time, as well as a moderated session. So the story time is for children. A moderated session is more for teens and adults, and that's based on some of our experience from last year, where we actually had a lot of teens and adults in the audience to our story time. So we decided to provide them with 2 different events. They'll have a little bit of a different tone. The story time is very much fun reading, really inclusive books, and more of a play dress-up kind of vibe, whereas the moderated session is really Faye and Fluffy speaking about their experiences and why they do what they do in terms of the story times, as well as their life experience that's led them to here. Our big dreamers are focusing on Elton John and Billie Jean King. We do have a number of 2S LGBTQ focused book clubs happening in June, the Archetype Allyship, and a Pride social night that I do believe we're doing in partnership with the Y. Now that's all external, but we didn't want to forget about internal, so we hope you'll also be hosting 2 lunch and learn sessions for staff in partnership with the 519, and there'll be 2 of those in June as well. So happy to take questions on my CEO update.
Thank you. Questions, board? Celso.
Question about the laptop program. I think it's fantastic, but how do we ensure those laptops don't grow legs and walk out?
Do we have them tagged? Like, we have security gates at our entrances, so they're security tagged.
You need to go to the desk and loan them out with a card. So we know who signed them out. They're also double tagged. So they have the normal RFID chip, but they also have like a special one on it designed for laptops. It's very hard to come off. So they would hypothetically beep if they pass the gates.
Good.
So they're double tagged.
And also durability, because desktops don't break, right? Because it's really hard. You have to really mean it. But laptops are more prone to accidents. Have you observed anything so far in terms of?
So we've had Chromebooks for a while, and really almost 0 damage on them. So this is just more or less that extension. But yeah, I mean, we're monitoring fairly closely because they're not cheap. So I mean, yeah, we are watching them very closely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Celso. Further questions? I'm not seeing any. Can I get a motion to receive the CEO's report, please? Thank you, Meredith, and I got it backwards, didn't I? Thank you, Rebecca and Meredith. Yes, all in favor? That's carried. Okay, this laptop or my iPad keeps timing out. Confidential discussion items, we don't have any. Is there any new business to come before the board? Ooh, a bunch of it. Ray, you first.
Yes, I'm not sure about
Is your mic on?
the governance with respect to the OPL, but I would like to put a motion forward under new business with respect to a conversation we had a couple meetings ago about the digitization of the newspapers that have in stock at Woodside. So I have a motion I want to put forward and get approval from the board to move forward.
I think it would have to be a notice of motion, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not sure if it's a notice.
Can you advise?
That would be at council only. You don't need to give notice.
Oh, really? Even at this level?
Yeah, I can, if you want to recess for 5 minutes, I can double check the bylaws, but I'm pretty sure it's council.
Let's recess for 5 minutes and check the bylaws, because this is an important matter, and I want to make sure we do it correctly.
Can we waive the procedural bylaw if there is a procedural bylaw?
I guess we could just do that, yeah, but why don't we let Jessica just check it out for it.
Just double check.
And then we can get back to it. So I'm just going to recess. We'll recess until 8:50. I'll give you a few minutes to go to the washroom, 8:55. Members of the board, it's 8:55, so I'm calling the meeting back to order. I think we're in the home stretch here, but I think we have kind of an exciting motion from Ray Chisholm to present today, something that I've certainly been very interested in for years. And we checked with Jessica, and we know what our procedure is, so.
Yeah, so.
Ray, you want to read your motion into the
Well,
record?
my apologies for holding up everyone.
Oh, that was fine.
With this being the
I got
last
another scone out of
on
the
the
deal.
agenda. I'll speak to it after I present the motion, and I do have a copy for you. That staff submit a digitization project implementation plan, including phases with associated funding requirements for endorsement by the OPL board for consideration as part of the 2024 budget process. And get away from the language, basically what we're saying is we'd like to move this forward to the town, the budget, to look at the digitization of all the newspapers that we have in storage at Woodside. There's a vast amount of information. If we don't get this digitized, we're going to lose it. And that'd be very unfortunate for that to happen, knowing that we have our museum, we have the Historical Society, but this is something that could be added to the big spectrum of heritage in Oakville and in our history. So I'm looking for a seconder and approval from the board to move this forward to the town budget.
So it looks like we have a seconder for the motion.
Okay.
Do you wish to speak to your seconding of the motion? No? Okay. Ray, have you concluded your comments?
Yes, that's my comments at this point, unless you want to add.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair?
I'll just add a little bit to it. So it was probably about 10 years ago, I think, when Metroland was downsizing, and they closed their Oakville operation, because they used to have these reams of newspapers stored in their facility on Spears Road, and they said, I guess, or was it on Wycroft? Anyway, they had one of their facilities. And with the downsizing of the newspaper industry in general, Torstar was closing down their local facilities, and so the Metroland said, hey, we have all these newspapers in storage, do you guys want them? So at the time, we said, I think the board encouraged it, and staff knew about it, and they facilitated it and took possession of all of it. But there's always been a question of how long can you hold on to it before it no longer becomes viable, and I think the time has come to jump on this. So I'll be supporting this motion, both here and at council, to get this project done. It's a fact that much of our history is recorded by the media, by newspapers, and when we lose that, anecdotal history is wonderful, but when you lose your newspapers, you're really losing a big chunk of who we were, how this community developed, and who its people were. So I think this is a very important project, and I'm certainly hoping for success getting it through the budgeting process, because I don't think it's going to be cheap. Yes, you may.
So currently at work right now, I'm working on developing our own instance of ChatGPT, and in that process have learned what you input into these things is just as important as what you're going to get out of them. And without having all of those resources in there, we won't have that history to add to any future technological developments. So yeah, that's why I'm supporting it.
Thank you.
Quick question.
Rod, sorry.
It's okay. Quick question. Are these back issues of Oakville Beaver and other newspapers or other small community newspapers?
It's the Beaver, what was before the Beaver, what was before that, what was before. It's all essentially the Beaver, but in different, there's Star Times. I think one of them was a Star Times.
Yeah, I think so. It's the Beaver and everybody that Metroland acquired.
Yeah.
I
think there's 5 different
so there's
titles.
The Oakville Journal, the Oakville Journal Record, thank you.
Yep.
The Abbey Oaks News, which became North Oakville News, which then became part. So it's basically all of the local papers.
Yep.
Because essentially Metroland eventually bought them all out over time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Chelsea.
Just a clarification question on the mechanics of the motion. So we're making a motion for the town to consider this as a project for execution by the town. This is not for the library to do, correct?
Just for clarity, what we're asking the town is for the money in the budget. The administration and management would still be with the library.
Okay. And the execution of that.
Correct.
So what we'll bring forward as part of the 2024 budget package is a report that kind of outlines our project, the different kind of sections, because there's the digitization piece, but there's also a portal piece. I think we need to look at, if you've ever tried to use our current portal, you have to really want the information, like really want it. And so I think we need to look at how we facilitate that, because it's one thing to digitize it all, but how do you make it accessible in a really kind of way? And so we're going to break it out into different phases with costing to it, and hopefully get it kicked off, potentially for 2024, and then potentially put in the 10-year forecast to kind of finish it up. But we'll give different price points, and that way the board can decide how they want to move forward with it, and then recommend it to council for approval.
And this is likely to be a budget discussion, but it's going to be, if approved, it's going to be over and above the operations budget that we already have.
It would be a capital project, correct?
Thank you.
It might be worth it, and we can just give this as direction, it might be worth also exploring any potential grants that are available to do this, whether it's through National Archives Canada or any of the other organizations that are into this kind of project.
Yeah, we can
If I'm not
have,
mistaken, Mr. Chair, I think that was the discussion we had previously, a couple of meetings ago, to looking at partnerships as part of it. That would be more palatable for the town, looking at this at budget time. I think you might have other partners or relationships. The only other point of advice I would put in is to get full support from our heritage people and the museum, historical society, and for sure, because I think they'd be all on side with that. And the more we have involved with that aspect, it goes a long way.
All three historical
Yes,
societies, yeah.
all three.
and that would be
Nope,
part of
it
the
wasn't just
consultation to
No,
build the project plan.
Andrew?
Yes, first I'll express my support of this initiative. I think it's really important to capture that history, and obviously we have, probably a short window with which to do it to capture this particular era of the history of the towns and townships. Furthermore, I might suggest an amendment to the motion to incorporate that suggestion to look for grants and collaborative efforts and so on.
I think that's a friendly, you'd be accepting of that? Jessica, can you throw something in there about, and to seek any possible grants that might be available? Thank you. Is the seconder okay with that as a friendly amendment? Who seconded to that? Okay.
Yes.
You're okay with that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
A friendly amendment.
It's a very friendly amendment.
We don't have to vote on the amendment.
No,
Perfect.
as long as it's not contrary or any of those sorts of things.
All right, thank you.
Did you want to speak again?
I just wanted to say, as another consideration for why this motion is so great, is for accessibility. And that's it. Full stop.
Yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity to really grab, a chunk of history. But I do want to, in defense of our current local database, it's not pretty. It was at its time when it was first established, It was cutting edge.
Yeah.
But it's still a wonderful resource. I've enjoyed using it for research.
Yep.
But also just for general interest, looking up, important dates in my life to see what's going on, because I wasn't here, until 1998. So it was always interesting to see what happened on my birthday or one of my kids' birthdays or something like that. So it's a really interesting resource. You just have to be very patient using it right now, and be very careful with your search.
You need almost librarian level search skills.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Boolean searching is definitely a thing with it.
Boolean searches, that's it, yeah. No chat GPT kind of response cues. Okay, that has been proposed, seconded, and friendly amended. Are there any further questions or comments? All in favor?
Could we just hear the revised amendment?
Sure. Jessica, can we hear the revised amendment?
I don't have the exact wording. That staff submit a digitization project implementation plan, including phases with associated funding requirements for endorsement by the OPL board for, that word? The OPL? The OPL board for what? What's that word? Presentation? No. Inclusion? Can't read. What's that word?
Or we could have just had Ray read it.
Consideration.
Oh, okay.
For
endorsement by the OPL board for consideration as part of the 2024 budget process, and that I'll wordsmith a little bit later, but I'm gonna add that OPL seek any funding, any possible funding grants where available, as like a second, like a comma at the end.
And collaboration with interested.
Sorry, I can't hear you without microphone.
And collaboration with interested organizations such as historical societies.
It'd be an interesting fundraising project, actually, for the library, if it was, you know, you could say, you know, sponsor your anniversary month for digital, figure, or your child's birthday, figure out, like, get, yeah, exactly, like, get a Mother's Day.
You gotta work for the library as one of the managers there to give them some creative ideas?
I'm just full of ideas. Okay, are we okay? Andrew, you satisfied with that? Okay, I'm gonna call the question. All in favor of the motion as amended? That is carried. Thank you. Well done. Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. We appreciate that very much. Other new business to come before the board today? Celso?
Just a quick comment. I've been reading financial statements and audit reports for the last 22 years. This is the cleanest I've ever seen. So just want to highlight that. Congratulations on keeping a tight ship.
Oh, I will give full credit to the finance team at the town. They are amazing, but I will let both Jade and Belinda know.
Both the town and the region have done exceptionally well in their financial management. In fact, both win awards for the quality of their work. It's very easy to be a counselor here when it comes to the accounting piece of it. We never have to worry about that. So, okay, other new business, other comments, questions? All in. Sorry, I don't call a question the question yet. I'm going to first announce the next date and time of the meeting is when?
June 15th.
June 15th here at Town Hall, and I'll look for motion to adjourn. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Ray. All in favor? That's carried. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you for your time and attention. And to those who are watching us on YouTube, thank you for tuning in and paying attention to the business of your library. We always appreciate your interest. If you have any comments or questions or feedback, please do not hesitate to reach out. We're certainly happy to take your questions and clarify anything that might need clarification. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening, and we'll see you at the library.